This is an exclusive presentation of WOWO 1190 AM and 107.5 FM, Unholstered.
Finally, this is an episode I've been wanting to get to here on Unholstered. Welcome on in. Hope you're having a fantastic weekend. I am Kayla Blakesley, and I am just one of your hosts here on Unholstered. I represent the local media side.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Sophia Rosales-Gatina. I am a captain with the Fort Wayne Police Department, and I represent the law enforcement side.
Law enforcement and local media teaming up to share and tell all of the stories that don't often get told when it comes to law enforcement. And let me tell you, no topic is off limits, and boy, does that hold true for today, Sophia. Here we are, kind of middle of July, and we're really just getting into to our new law here of constitutional carry in Indiana. I know we talked about this. We wanted to revisit this topic anyway. It went into effect here in Indiana July 1. But now that we've had a couple of weeks to obviously give law enforcement some time to digest it all, and just Hoosiers and residents in general to digest it all, there's so much misinformation. There's just a lot out there that just isn't true. I know you've been absorbing a lot of it. I've been absorbing a lot of it. So hopefully we can try and set the record straight today.
And we want to do that because we want people in our state to carry correctly and appropriately. I don't want you to get arrested. I don't want you to get in trouble. You need to know what you can and can't do. And I'll preface this right now by saying this is not legal advice. I'm not giving you legal advice. I'm telling you our interpretation of the law and how we were going to handle it moving forward. If you have specific questions to your specific situation, then you need to contact an attorney and find that out for yourself.
Good disclaimer, Sophia.
I had to put that out there because people are like, well, you shouldn't be. I'm like, I'm just telling you what we know. Because really, we don't get any explanation from about these kind of laws when they come down. It's like, here's a law, you figure it out. And then we have to wait for the prosecutors to answer and all those kind of things. So I did bring on someone, though, to help me with this. I've noticed that there's been a lot of messaging coming out from some police departments in the state of Indiana. And some of it's been kind of vague. And then I always kind of, to get the feel of where people are at, I'll go down and read comments. And even though people always tell me, don't read the comments, but I do, because I have to have a pulse on what people are saying and what people are thinking. And I've noticed there's been so much misinformation in the comment section, and people are like going forth like this is the correct thing. And I'm like, no. And but I can't sit there and refute another department's stuff in the comments. So this show is where we're going to do that. So I brought on...
Can't wait for that. Jeez, talk about a tease.
Yes. So I brought on Captain Scott Burning. He is the captain of special operations for the Fort Wayne Police Department, and I'm going to let him introduce himself now.
How you doing? I'm Captain Scott Burning, Fort Wayne Police Department. Like I said, work with special operations, and I'm under Deputy Chief Marty Bender. We are pretty much responsible for taking care of all the specialty teams in Fort Wayne. Those being, just a small example, would be our EST team, our SWAT team, our public safety response team, which is Riot Squad. Also,
we learned that. We just learned that a couple weeks ago.
Our crisis response team, which Sophia is a major part of. Our EOD unit, which is Bomb Squad, ASU, which is the air unit, our drones, K9 traffic, and all the other special events that go on in Fort Wayne, like Three Rivers Festival and all the parades.
Geez, so you got a lot on your plate, man.
On his plate.
How long have you been with the Fort Wayne Police Department?
Well, I'm going to age both of us. Me and Sophia went to the academy together.
And we all know that Sophia's been with the department for well over 20 years.
Well, I'll age her. Then it was 28 years here next month we'll have on the department.
Yeah, notice I try to be polite by not saying the exact number.
Well, I was 2 when I started, so, I was the youngest police officer ever.
Well, okay, let's talk about permitless carry here. Scott, can you I just want to make sure we're all starting on the same page. Can you explain permitless carry as it applies to Indiana?
Well, constitutional carry, permitless carry, they're basically the same thing. The recent Supreme Court ruling came down that said, I probably should not go into that first, but we're going to talk about in Indiana, now it's actually, you do not need a handgun permit to carry a concealed or even open carry in Indiana. But you do have to be a proper person, and there are certain prohibitions and things that would prohibit you from carrying a weapon.
So, there's still a certain age requirement. You still have to be 18, and you have to be a lawfully abiding citizen. What are some of the reasons why someone might not be able to carry a handgun?
Carrying a handgun without a license was what it used to be called. Instead, now it's possession without a license, and we'll have prohibited persons who can't carry a gun anywhere, anytime. And there are several examples of that. Convicted felon, for one. That's anybody who's been adjudicated to serve more than 1 year or more in prison. And one thing I want to stress about that is a lot of times somebody will be sentenced to serve 1 year, but because of good time, they may get out in 8 months. So I would hope that they wouldn't consider they're still able to carry. That's something they need to consider, that if you were found guilty of a felony and your sentence was 1 year or more, you are a prohibited person, even if you only spent 8 months or 9 months because of good time.
Okay, that's a new one. I hadn't heard it that way, but that makes sense. Now, prior to this law taking effect, though, when you had to apply for your permit, you could be turned down that way. So now in letting you know, hey, you're a convicted felon, or you're one of these few things in this list for a reason you can't carry a handgun. But because of this, that process has gone away, right?
Correct. Yes. And like we spoke before on this shows before, when we had a couple other officers on, we were talking about this. Where people are going to kind of get it's a little sticky is what happened when you were a juvenile, because some of those things don't affect you, but some of them do. Can
you explain?
So there are certain offenses when you're a juvenile that happen, and juvenile records pretty much kind of go away after you turn 18, for lack of a better way of saying it. But there are certain things that don't. So certain felonies that you did as a juvenile would still carry over into your adult life and would prohibit you from carrying a handgun. You need to know what those are. And I can't tell you them all right here because I don't know them, but there are certain ones that will prohibit you from carrying as an adult.
What if they are? What if you have one of those things on your record from when you were a juvenile and you still have a gun? Can you still purchase a gun? Will you still pass that federal background check?
You shouldn't be able to,
okay.
But I can't guarantee that would happen because I don't know exactly what all information, because I know that there's no national, like we've talked about, there's no national registry for mental illness. Mm-hmm. That's where those local checks were really helpful. And in here, you're prohibited from carrying a gun if you're adjudicated as a mental defective or committed to a mental institution. But if you have not yet done that, but you've had several run-ins with police for mental incapacity, you've been turned down. I mean, we do have red flag laws and all those kinds of things too, which I know people get really up in arms about, but we do not use them very often here at all. And I know people are like, well, they just come in. All you got to do is have someone call in and say, hey, he's crazy. And they go and take your guns. That's not the case. It's not true. There is a complete legal process for this. It's not, we're just not taking people's guns willy-nilly. But, there are just several of those local checks that came with those permits that we're not getting now. And until and I kind of, like said before, we put the cart before the horse when we kind of leapt into this, but we don't have those systems in place to check.
One of the biggest misconceptions, and it blows my mind, folks don't know I host my own radio program on the weekdays here on this radio station, and I try to beat on this drum almost every day. But just because there's permitless carry doesn't mean you can just carry your handgun anywhere at any time. And you're both shaking your heads.
Yeah, I brought a list of those.
Did you?
You cannot.
Okay, please share that. I mean, I feel like I have been beating my head against a brick wall with this, but Scott, I'll let you do it.
Do you want me to finish the prohibited reasons? I can keep going
go right
into those.
Sure.
That's kind of what I do. Persons under indictment. And the way we mean that is that any formal accusation of a crime made by a prosecuting attorney in any court for a crime punishable by a term of imprisonment more than 1 year. So if you're under indictment, you haven't been adjudicated yet, but you're under indictment for a potential felony, you cannot carry.
Got it.
Okay? Meaning they've been charged with a felony, and the definition of that basically means any formal accusation of a crime made by a prosecuting attorney in any court for a crime punishable by a term of imprisonment more than 1 year. Another reason would be any person convicted of a crime of domestic violence or domestic battery or stalking, anything along those lines. If you've been convicted, that would preclude you from being able to carry your weapon. If you are subject to a protective order, unless it's been disqualified under the Brady, and that's a whole other topic.
I say that is a big topic, though, that whole protective order thing. I know we've talked about that greatly before in previous episodes on Unholstered about constitutional carry, but Sophia, can you run through that, a brief version of that?
Yeah, so a lot of times people get protective orders when sometimes it's like neighbor to neighbor.
Yeah.
There's no kind of domestic underlying issue. And those would not, you'd still be able to carry under those. And your actual protective order will say whether it's Brady qualified or disqualified.
Okay.
It says it on there. So you just need to know. Most of the time, you can just ask the court right there, hey,
I know that one gets confusing, too.
It does. So if there's any kind of underlying domestic situation to the protective order, you will be barred from carrying a handgun while that is being adjudicated, because you'll have 30 days to contest that. And then if you go in, and then there'll be a hearing, and you'll be able to present your side, and then the judge will determine whether or not that the protective order stands.
Okay, got it. What else, Scott?
Okay, if you're under 18, doesn't apply. Right. You cannot carry a handgun if you're under 18. On private property, you can. If the weapon's been supplied by a parent, something like that, you can do that on your own private property, but you cannot just openly or conceal carry if you're under 18. Another one that came up, and this started some discussion, I think that's why I put the paper out. Yeah. The state police put out some that said a fugitive from justice, and people had a lot of questions about that. And
a fugitive from justice?
Yeah.
What does that mean?
Well, fugitive from justice, that said you fled another state to avoid prosecution for a felony, or you maybe even left the state to avoid testifying in a criminal proceeding.
That's a no-brainer, right? Should be.
You would think. I've come to find that nothing is a no-brainer for me anymore.
Okay.
So they did cover that. They covered that, and then the next one they listed was an illegal alien, and basically that's any person who entered the United States without inspection and authorization from the immigration department. So,
but I will say though that it's illegal for us to go up and demand people prove that they're citizens as well. So I'm not. So these are still questions I have too as an officer.
Going to say that.
Right. So I can't just come after you because you look a certain way.
Right.
And demand that you show me proof that you're a citizen. So I that would take some. I don't even know what that would take to figure out. But
scratching my head on that one. We won't touch on that one here. Is that all of them, Scott?
No, there's a few more that they're pretty minor. And Sophia already hit on it. You've been adjudicated a mental defective or committed to a mental institution. If you've been dishonorably discharged from the military or the National Guard, that's a big one to keep in mind.
So are we just trusting that people know these things about themselves?
I think we are. Like I said, there's no database that someone can go to and find this out unless they go enter into the permit, where you can still get that, because Indiana is a shall issue state still. Mm-hmm. And we do still have that permit, because this is a huge one, and this was the one that caused most of the confusion for everyone. If you are a resident of Indiana and you're traveling outside of the state, you have to have a permit to carry in another state.
Unless they are a constitutional carry state. Some of them you need to check on that.
There's so much confusion. There's reciprocity issues.
I've spoken to 2 attorneys about this very topic, and they both gave me a different answer. Well, that was going to be my number one question I asked today. If you are driving,
there are some websites you can go to, and I brought those, and we can get to those in a little bit if you want. There's just a couple more that even
are signing on to
those. Yeah, that are prohibited. If you are under 23, and I think Sophia was kind of hitting on this, if you're under 23 and you had an adjudication as a delinquent for unlawful possession of a firearm, as a serious violent felon, even if you did that as a juvenile, that would prohibit you from carrying. And the last one's probably pretty obscure, but if you've renounced your citizenship.
Huh. No kidding. Okay.
That's another thing that would prohibit you from
I've heard a lot of singers
carrying.
doing. I think the lead singer from Green Day wanted to say
I heard
it was
a lot
not
of
American
I'm still waiting
anymore.
for them to move to Canada.
Yeah,
I don't
I'm
know
still
what
waiting for
they're
everybody to go, but they're not.
Okay, so that's kind of our whole list of folks who would be prohibited to carry a handgun in Indiana. Talk to me, Scott, about that other handy-dandy list then that you have that we were mentioning, that it still doesn't mean you can carry your handgun, concealed or not, in certain areas. For example, no, you can't carry your handgun near a school still.
In schools or on school property. It's the number one listed.
Yep, within 500 feet of school property.
That's the one I keep beating my head against a wall with.
And those include school buses as well.
Okay, that's good to know too.
Yeah.
What else? What's hitting with that list, Scott?
Hey, there's a big list. Any child care institution that's run by child welfare services is prohibited.
No guns.
No guns.
No guns.
Can't take it on the grounds of the Indiana State Fair. You cannot be, even with a permit, you were not allowed to have a handgun.
I did not know that one.
At the Indiana State Fair.
No, I did not know that one.
Any of the Indiana state government campuses, which, basically means the state capitol, the state library, etc.
Yeah.
So those are some of the big ones. Any of the Department of Workforce Management properties, obscure, but, airports and airplanes, I think we all know that one. That's pretty easy.
I sure hope by now we all know that, but maybe we don't.
Now we still have to say it.
Yeah.
Horse tracks, riverboat casinos are two of them that they also list. You can't carry your weapon onto those. And you already mentioned that courtrooms and buildings that may have a courthouse in them or courtroom in them, a lot of times weapons are totally prohibited at those locations.
And any business that...
I want to say that loud and clear.
Yes.
Any business that says no firearms means they don't want you to have firearms. Those are private businesses. Yes, they're open to the public, but they get to determine what comes into their place of business.
Everyone always asks me what I think of that. And I will always be on the side of the small business owner. They get to decide whether or not you're paying with cash or plastic, or you are carrying a handgun in there or not. That is the right of that small business owner. So thank you, Sophia, for making that one loud and clear.
Businesses have the right to determine if you can or cannot carry into their place of business.
But now I'm still so confused. Sophia, you hit on it. Like I said, I've talked to different attorneys about this, of whether or not, because obviously you still need a permit for reciprocity. If you want to travel to other states with your firearm, you still need a permit to do that, unless you're traveling to other constitutional carry states.
Well, actually, and what I've found is Indiana will take all the states. We allow.
So you can come here from Illinois,
yes,
which is not a constitutional carry state, with your firearm and openly carry it here in Indiana.
Yes.
Under our constitutional carry laws, it stands they do not need to have a permit. Anyone coming to Indiana from any other state is legally allowed to carry here in the state of Indiana as long as they don't meet the criteria of a prohibited person.
And that's where you got to get into the weeds on this a little bit. Some of those websites, U.S. Concealed Carry is a good website to go to. They will tell you what states have reciprocity with you. And they'll go into what you can and can't do. They break down magazine laws, everything. They'll really break it down for you. It's a good source of information. And
on top of that, there are, I think, approximately 32 states where you'd have reciprocity with your gun license, and then the other states are constitutional carry. So I guess there's reciprocity between the constitutional carry states. But the states that do not have constitutional carry will still require you to obtain that gun licensing permit.
If you don't know if you're all the things we went through on prohibited person, the best way to find out if you're a prohibited person or not is apply for a license.
Which is free.
Which you can still do, yeah.
It's free.
And it's still available. And then you're covered in other states, regardless. This always, I don't know, I won't get too political here, but this always irks me that these laws come down, but there's no explanation. And there's nobody but us trying to figure this out and trying to give you the information we find that we've gotten from our prosecutors and from other legal people here over our county. But this shouldn't be coming from us. This should be coming from the top down, and it just isn't. And that's what really kind of annoys me about that. We throw this law out here, and we're just like, here you guys go.
Figure it out.
And they're like, okay, but where do we go to figure it out? And that's kind of, it's upsetting for me as a law enforcement officer, because I don't want anyone to get in trouble because they just didn't know. Because we don't know who's coming here. I mean, a quick check for our system, but if you're coming from California, you've never been in Indiana, there's no check I'm going to give you quickly that's going to figure it out. Because, remember, I only have so many minutes in a traffic stop to get stuff done. And if I can't access anything because
that's the big headache.
It takes too long.
The time limit.
Now we're talking about anybody coming from anywhere. And how will I know that people don't fit any of these, especially like an illegal alien or someone, So it's just... Boy, this is a really murky.
Yes, we're just fresh into this.
And back up on something here for me, Scott, that you just said, that time limit at a traffic stop.
We can't, because of the Fourth Amendment, we can't seize a person. That means hold them there any longer than it really should take for us to process that offense that we stopped them for. Unless we can develop some probable cause or have reasonable suspicion, a lower element, that something else is going on there.
Criminal activity is afoot.
Right.
I think is the correct term.
So is there like I don't know if you can, like an average time for a traffic stop? Is that?
I don't know.
I think the courts have a general sense because, I mean, it depends. So sometimes.
But there isn't like a written rule like this traffic stop has to be conducted in 12 minutes.
This traffic stop has to be done in 5 minutes and 35 seconds. No, there's nothing like that. But there is a general time, like, you know, it can't take us 15 minutes to run your driver's license and write a ticket.
Okay.
But things happen, right? So we have in-car computers, but sometimes those go down and we're standing in line because maybe the system's down and now our dispatch is backed up and we're waiting and waiting and waiting because all the other officers who are doing their business have to go to that channel and do all their business too. So there's always nuances that happen that may extend your period at a traffic stop. But if we cannot articulate that those things happened that were out of our control that made it go longer, then we're probably going to be in a little bit of trouble if this traffic stop has now gone 15, 20, 30 minutes when it really shouldn't have.
I did not know that.
Yeah. So we're bound by court, by court rulings.
In the recent ruling, the Supreme Court ruling, Judge Thomas actually even said it's not just the Second Amendment, it's the 14th Amendment that also apply. And that means, you know, across the board, your right doesn't change just because you live in New York to protect yourself outside the home. Heller was the one that affirmed your right to protect yourself inside the home. The recent Supreme Court decision said you had the right to protect yourself outside the home. So you could take these states that are may issue, they're going to run into a problem because it's going to affect a lot of things. It's, you know, New York was the example, but there's a lot of states that make it really hard for you to get a handgun permit. Well, this is what this decision is going to say, that now you have a right to protect yourself outside the home also. So we can't have unequal laws across different states. So if we're allowing our citizens to carry, and it's constitutional, if you come into my state, we're not going to hold you to a different standard because you're from a different state. And that goes back to the 14th.
Right.
So he kind of hit on that kind of stuff. And there's one other, we've got to remember, it's not just state law, it's federal law that also applies. And a good example of that would be the federal law. Michigan is a marijuana state. You can have medical marijuana. You can't hold a handgun permit and a marijuana medical card at the same time by federal law. So if you say live in Michigan, you have medical marijuana, but you got a lake cottage at Hamilton Lake, you would also be prohibited from having a handgun.
That's a good example. Okay.
Yeah, so there's like I said, there's so many nuances that we just don't know. And we're going into this, and this has been thrust upon us in a short period of time, and all these questions still remain unanswered. I mean, who's answering them?
Who's supposed to answer
I would imagine the people who made the law should know, and they should have come down with these questions answered.
Certainly other states have got to be tackling similar questions, right?
I don't know. Well, I don't have the answers to those either. And every day people come up with new questions that I'm like, okay, that's a good question. I don't know.
This one's kind of loaded, and I want to put it to both of you, though. And I'll be curious if you both have the same answer or not. But do you think, because this is also the big kind of topic that gets brought up, but do you think permitless carry, and we can talk just Indiana specifically, we don't have to talk about any other states, but just as it applies to Indiana, do you think it's going to make Indiana a less safe state?
I don't think it'll be less safe, but I think there'll be a lot more people carrying, if that, and I don't know what the potential for that would be, because I don't know what people's intent is. I don't know if criminals are going to carry regardless of what happens, but will someone who is a law-abiding citizen decide, I'm going to start carrying now too, because I can? I don't know. I don't know if people will do that.
My opinion, no. I'm just going to flat out say no. And I wondered if that would be a question, so I checked on that. And
Boy Scouts doesn't know me, but you know me well.
And I did find a USA Today article that listed the states, all of the 50 of the states, by violent crime rate. And that takes into account your population, not just because you've got a million people. So it's weighted. The first three in Maine, Vermont, and New Hampshire are all constitutional carry states.
Yep.
So I went down deeper on the list. Those were the first three listed, and found out that 5 of the top 7 and 11 of the top 16 are all constitutional carry states. and they have the lowest violent crime rate.
So proof is kind of in the pudding for that one a little bit.
But is a violent crime rate because they have low density of people? Or is this per capita
It's weighted, yeah. It's based on amount of crime per 1,000.
Okay.
So it's I checked into that too, but yeah.
So could one argue then, just walk down this road here with me, Scott, you know where I'm going. One argue then it will make your state actually safer.
And I would like to have more good guys with guns out there.
Yeah.
I would like that. And I know a lot of these things are often, stats can lie.
Sure, we can have stats say pretty much whatever we want them to say.
Sure.
There was a organization, it's a pro carry organization, also did a study, and they took the FBI study of active shooter reports from 2000 to 2017 and broke it down by the first one was 2000 to 2013, then 14 and 15 and 16 and 17.
Yep.
They compiled the stats on that, and then the 283 events, 33 of them had an armed civilian present at it. So that was 11% of the time there was an armed person there at an active shooter event. And, they define the active shooter as one or more individuals actually trying to engage or kill people in a crowd or something like that. That's a standard they used. Well, those 33, 25 of the time they were able to stop the event. Six of the times they reduced the loss of life, and 2% there was no effect. So, in essence, that came out to be about 94% of the time, if there was an armed individual there, they were able to at least affect how the event unfolded. So, and I will add that there were no civilian loss of life as a result of any of their interactions or attempting to intervene.
Wow.
So it can happen.
Yeah.
And it does more
happen.
often than
Yes.
we hear about, because we always hear about the ones that don't, because I think we do that because they just affect more carnage. So that's what we hear, right? You bleed, it leads.
Absolutely. That's my side of things. Not that I agree with it, but that's usually how it goes on the news side. The other place that I feel like we're running into some issues, though, at least when it comes to understanding this law, is open carry versus concealed carry.
Right.
They are one and the same, though, for this law, right?
They are one and the same for this law. They always have been even for permits. You've always had that ability to open carry or conceal carry.
Which I have my own feelings on open carry.
I do as well, but, and I don't know why anyone would open carry at all.
Yeah.
I mean, I know as officers we do it with our badge and our gun, but that's a little different than a general person just going out there and open carrying. But Scott, I mean, can we touch on this subject a little bit?
I can't agree with both of you more. I really hope everybody, if they haven't already been carrying a handgun in the past, and this new permitless carry encourages them to start carrying, please conceal it.
Yeah.
There are so many reasons to conceal it, and so many reasons negatively things can happen that when you open carry. You want to have the element of surprise if you are carrying a weapon. And we always talk with our recruits, and it goes back to the OODA loop. Colonel Boyd from the Air Force developed. It's called the OODA loop: Observe, Orient, Decide, Act. You always want to be inside the other person's OODA loop. An example of that would be during a hostage rescue. A door breaches. All of a sudden, the perpetrators have to decide what just happened, figure it out while we're already moving through. The next thing, there's something rolling in on the ground. Well, that's a distraction device. Boom, it goes off. It makes them start their OODA loop all over again. While we've already observed what we're going to do, we've decided, we've oriented ourselves to it, we've decided what we're going to do, and we're acting upon it. So the faster you can go through your OODA loop and make the other person keep reacting to what you're doing, the more chances you're going to have to win that encounter. Well, if you're standing there with a gun on your hip, you're already way behind the eight ball because the perpetrator's already seen you are armed.
Yeah.
You've set yourself up to be the first one assaulted, and or if they decide they just want your gun. Just watched a video about 2 weeks ago of a guy standing in line at McDonald's with open carry, and a gentleman just reached up and grabbed his gun, turned around, and walked right out with it. It can happen that fast. And even us as officers, we like to think we are situationally aware all the time. You just can't be 100% of the time and just standing in line somewhere. You got to keep in mind that somebody decides they want your weapon. They might not even be armed. They follow you out to your car, hit you in the back of the brick. Now they got a brand new pistol or something like that you've been carrying, and they've taken it from you. It sets you up for the assault, and I'm sure you'd much rather be ahead of that than behind it.
I always feel like, and maybe I don't know if this is the right perception or not, I just feel like a lot of times, at least I have a lot of friends who openly carry. And there's just like this attitude, this ego about it. Like, almost, look at my fancy car versus your fancy car. That's kind of sometimes how I equate it to, is like, people driving around their Porsches and their Lamborghinis, and they're like, look how cool my car is. Look at the color of mine. Look at the make and model of mine. It's more of a ego-driven thing. Yeah.
Yeah. Sometimes, personally, I think the same thing at times. And I'm here to assure everyone that no matter how good you are, there is someone better.
Yeah.
And you don't know who that person is. Some of the most mild,
and like Scott said, we just gave them the tactical advantage
Yeah. So I don't understand the concept of open carry as a general citizen, just walking around with it just open, unless it's just look at me, I'm trying to bait people.
Is it, hey, I'm a quicker draw? Like, I'm trying to come up with reasons why someone might justify.
So I'm your Huckleberry kind of.
I think a lot of it is they're doing what we call Second Amendment audits, and I've done some training on First Amendment audit and Second Amendment audit. We got people that go around town and will film like a government building from out on the sidewalk on the easement where he legally knows he can be standing, and say it's a post office. The post office is going to call and say, I got a guy filming us, and we have officers show up, and we try to tell them, and it's the same way with carrying a handgun. And I ran into it on the 25th of this month. I was down there for the row protest down the courthouse. Yeah. I was approached, and I saw him coming through the crowd, and I saw there was it appeared to be a Glock, the butt of a handgun hanging out of his pocket. And, of course, he walked up to me with a guy following behind him with a camera. And the first words out of his mouth were, I have a gun. I said, I know, I observed you coming towards me, that you were armed. And I think he was going to do one of the audits. He wanted to find out what I was going to do. And I think most of these guys know their rights. But having done the training and put it out there, I told him, I said, well, I see you have a weapon, but I can't articulate you are committing a crime, have committed a crime, or about to commit a crime. So I have no reason to stop and ask you your pedigree information, meaning your name, date of birth, all that stuff. You can just turn and walk away from me. Well, it took the winds right out of his sail. He's like, oh.
Wow. Okay. I didn't even know people did that.
All the time.
All the time. Long story short, before the day was over, he came back over to me. At this point, then he had it up on his he had a tack vest on, real militant looking. And came up and started just talking with me again before the day was over. We were talking about his daughter who's in ICU that was prematurely born, and he was totally different attitude after that. But he was trying to set me up for violating his Fourth Amendment right of seizure and, holding him there without any articulable and specific facts of why I needed to get his information.
And I will say, officers screw it up. Nationwide, we screw it up all the time.
Mm-hmm. Well, everybody screws up all the time.
Every officer doesn't know everything about everything.
Yeah.
I just, because, man, that's a lot. And as I sit here and we do these shows more and more, and there's all this topic, I'm like, well, I do know a lot about a lot, but I don't know everything. There's no possible way I can know everything. And I probably will say something on the show, then I'll screw it up, and then I'll have to figure out how to say, well, I screwed it up. But it happens, and there's film about police, but it doesn't mean every officer is this way, and those audits really get. I don't know. I'm over it.
Yeah, I can tell you. I can sense your exhaustion.
For an officer to get himself set up for a lawsuit or a complaint, if he doesn't, if you can't articulate why you're stopping that person, the whole Terry stop, you have to have specific and articulable reasons why you're stopping that person. And the example I use a lot of time is if I have patrolling at 3 a.m. and I see a gentleman walking down an alley with a bag in his hand. At that point, can I stop him and ask him what his name is and why he's there? Not legally.
Yeah.
Now, if I see that same man looking into garages, each one as he passes, now I've just got a specific and articulable reason why I've stopped him. Well, that may lead to, going up to him, the same guy that's just walking down the alley with the bag in his hand. Well, it's milk and bread. He's coming back from the store, and he lives 2 houses down. It's the quickest way to his house. But that guy looking in, if that bag happens to have burglary tools in it or say a drill with somebody else's name on it that doesn't match his, well, now I've got reasonable suspicion that maybe a crime has occurred. So you use those steps to develop that stuff. And we tell them, use that same stuff if you see somebody that's armed. for the most part, a felon is not going to put a gun on the side of his hip and walk up and down the road trying to get the police's attention.
Right.
These guys are looking to film you and mock you for your lack of understanding of the law.
Do you feel like you both will just kind of be in this, not that you're not already super vigilant and hyper aware. You're police officers, that's what you do. That's like the first thing Sophia said is picked her seat in the studio so she could see the door, day one. But do you feel like this is going to just kind of take that to a whole new level now that we have constitutional carry, that you're even more hyper alert and even more vigilant?
We always tell the officers, you should treat every encounter you have with a citizen as if they're empty, or armed. So I don't think it's going to change much.
Okay.
I really don't. And I really wonder how many people are really going to just take advantage of this. If they didn't want to have a firearm before, they're not going to.
And have one now,
Indiana made
Although
it so.
I did have some people say, well, I was too lazy to go get a permit. So I'm like, oh my gosh.
Well, you might have a handful of those.
If you're too lazy to get a permit, you're probably too lazy to get training. And that is the key. If you are going to start, I can't stress enough, get some training.
Yeah.
Know how to operate your handgun. Because some handguns have safeties, some don't. I mean, the overall safety to keep your finger off the trigger unless it's something you're willing to destroy. But Scott's right. Get into a class. We've had people on that hold classes. There are several classes around town. If at the bare minimum, you should know how to accurately shoot. You should know what happens when your gun runs empty. You should know what that feels like. You should know what it feels like when the trigger gets pulled and the bullet comes out, because it's just different. I mean, you anticipate a lot of stuff, but it's never how it is. And there have been classes that I was a part of that had video of people in active shootouts with other people, and these people. I went to the range on a regular basis, and it was nothing like I thought it was going to be. This was completely different. So you have to know and really start thinking about what you're willing to do with that handgun. And it's not just for show. If you're carrying it around just for show,
just driving the flashy car to drive it.
Yeah, man, that's a recipe for disaster. You should know how to use that gun if you're going to do it.
And when you can illegally use it.
And when, that's a big one.
That's a whole nother.
That's a whole other show.
Yeah, that's a whole nother show.
Yeah.
Scott, I don't know if we got down to all of the answers. I feel like we did. For the most part, I still know it can be. What was the word you used? Murky.
Yeah,
I like
very
that.
murky still.
It can still be murky. So I'm sure we'll revisit the topic again. Maybe we'll have to bring you back, Scott. Maybe in the next month or two, still as things unfold. As you run into scenarios, Sophia, let us know. Hey, this happened. Here's how we worked this one out. I'd be curious.
Definitely, because I think this is, as we go along, we're going to learn more and more, and we're going to have to figure things out a little bit better. But I would encourage, if anybody has questions or you have questions, submit them, and we'll try to find out answers for you.
Yeah, you can submit them on our text back line 46862. You can email me personally, kblakesley@wowo.com. And Sophia and I have talked about constitutional carry before. If you've missed any previous episodes of those topics, feel free to download the podcast. Anywhere you can download a podcast, just search for Unholstered. Your town, your team, your topics. This is Unholstered.
Thanks for listening to Unholstered. Be sure to subscribe to us on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you listen. And remember, you can listen every Saturday morning at 10:30 on WOWO 1190 and 107.5 FM.
Podcasts by Federated Media.